The Kurdish genocide was an awful chain of events that led to the killings of many innocent people. Before we talk about this genocide, however, let's talk about the term genocide itself. What is genocide? Well, let me tell you. A genocide is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. And that is exactly what happened to the Kurds during the Iraqi Kurdish genocide, also known as the Anfal campaign. The name Anfal comes from a story in the Quran that means spoils of war. The story itself depicts the plundering of enemy land. Because of the background the name had, it was used as one of the many reasons to justify slaughtering innocent Kurdish people. So the Anfal campaign started during the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988. One of the war's major causes was a dispute between the borders of Iraq and Iran, which eventually led to conflict between the two countries. Iraq had more financial aid from other countries compared to Iran. Among these were the US, the UK, France, and Germany. Iran, however, had very little support. The support they did receive came from countries such as Syria, North Korea, South Korea, and the Republic of China. Despite the fact that Iraq had the upper hand, however, the war would remain a stalemate. But later in the war something happened. The Kurds from northern Iraq, which was an area predominantly Kurdish, began siding with Iran in an attempt to gain the independence they long wanted. This marked the start of the Kurdish genocide. Saddam Hussein, the leader, or should I say dictator, of Iraq at the time, didn't want the Kurds to cause any trouble in the country, so he fought them as harshly as he fought Iran. Innocent Kurdish people, he fought as harshly as he fought Iranians. Can you believe that? The fact that Saddam Hussein didn't want any trouble coming out of the Kurds wasn't the only reason the genocide happened. Saddam Hussein was part of a party called the Ba'ath Party, which controlled Iraq from 1968 to 2003. The party oppressed minorities and believed that cleansing Iraq of non-Arabs, including the Kurds, would lead Iraq to success in the war and, furthermore, a better country altogether. Saddam Hussein eventually appointed his cousin, Ali Hassan al-Majid, as the organizer for the attack against the Kurds. At first his plans were to eliminate rebels that sided with Iran, but eventually turned into an all-out genocide. Now, genocides happen in 8 stages. From 1 to 8, these stages are classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, extermination, and denial. Now, each of these stages, of course, has a direct correlation to the Kurdish genocide. So classification, of course, is distinguishing a group of people by race, ethnicity, or religion. So the Kurdish people were called the Kurds, while the Iraqis were called the Arabs, and the Kurds were treated as the lower class and were discriminated for that reason. Symbolism is giving a name or symbol to the classification itself. For example, during the Holocaust, when under Nazi rule, the Jews were given yellow stars to show that they were Jewish. In the Anfal campaign, the Kurds were forced to carry ID cards to show their background. Dehumanization is one group denying the humanity of the other group. They see the group as animals, insects, or diseases. The Kurds were treated exactly like this when the Iraqi government would oppress them by doing things such as kicking them out of their homes and using their land for other purposes. Organization is exactly that, organizing the campaign. Saddam Hussein did this by appointing his cousin to lead and do the actual planning of the Kurdish genocide. Polarization is the point in a genocide where the two groups start getting even more fiercely driven apart. During the Anfal campaign, laws were made against the Kurds that promoted the separation of the two groups. Preparation is when things really start to heat up. The actual preparation of the genocide is the point where leaders begin to build concentration camps, rally the specific groups into ghettos, or start cutting off supplies to a specific region. This is exactly what happened to the Kurds when camps were built for people to be sent out to, and homes were destroyed, which began displacing many citizens. Extermination is the part of the 8 stages that is the actual killing. Homes of Kurds continued to be destroyed while men and boys were taken from camps to be executed, and women, children, and elderly were left to starve. Air raids and chemical attacks continued on residential areas, feeding the number of casualties. The killings of the Kurdish people happened in 8 carefully planned stages, which shouldn't be confused with the 8 stages of genocide. This is the 8 stages of attacks, which I will get to later. The last stage is denial. This is the stage where the government tries to hide anything that happened during the genocide. Mass graves are dug up to hide the bodies are burned, and the government tries to do anything to hide evidence that the genocide actually happened. So let's go back to the actual attacks, which, as I said, happened in 8 stages conducted by Hussein's cousin. Now bear with me while I try to pronounce all of these. The first stage started in Dali Jafadi Marg. The second stage started in the Koradak district. The third stage started in the Garmian district. The fourth stage started in the Askar district. The fifth, sixth, and seventh stage started in Shaklawa and Rwandese districts. And the eighth stage started in the Bananan district. Now, as you can see, all these stages has some form of chemical attack involved. Since Saddam Hussein's cousin was conducting all these chemical attacks, he was eventually given the name Chemical Ali. Now, the most devastating out of all the chemical attacks happened in the Kurdish town of Halabja, which I'll hand it over to my good pal Joe to tell you all about it.
The chemical attack against the Kurdish town of Halabja took place on March 16, 1988. The chemical attack lasted for 5 hours and started as a series of rocket and napalm attacks, but later included Iraqi aircraft dropping chemical bombs on the residential areas. The attack killed between 3,200 and 5,000 people and injured 7,000 to 10,000 more, most of them being civilians. Those who survived were forced into concentration camps. Most men and boys were killed in mass executions and put into mass graves. The women and children were left to starve. The town itself was later demolished by Iraq crews after the attack.
And there you have it, the worst chemical attack in the campaign. The campaign was eventually called off by Saddam Hussein in 1988, but that was far from the end of the terrors the Kurds would experience. The remaining Kurds that were left were told to return to their homes to live in peace. There was just one small problem, though. They didn't have anywhere to return to. The Kurdish economy in Iraq was basically destroyed at this point. On top of this, the Iraqi government continued to oppress and even kill Kurdish people, even though the campaign was called off. This would ultimately go on until 2003. In 2003, Saddam Hussein was eventually captured by American forces during what was called Operation Red Dawn. He remained in American custody in a camp until his trial. Hussein's first trial was in 2005 when he was tried for crimes against humanity, especially against the Kurds, but other ethnic groups also applied. A second trial was conducted in 2006. Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging, and after an attempted appeal, which obviously didn't go through, he was hanged on December 30th, 2006. Oh, and his cousin, Chemical Ali, was tried and executed in 2010. It wasn't all bad for the Kurds in the end, though. After the new Iraqi constitution was adopted in 2005, the Kurds were granted an autonomous state within Iraq called Kurdistan. We can only hope nothing like this ever happens again.